Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Patrick Wheeler, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Digital Strategies at Tuck. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues that you may see on the session, including Alva Taylor, our Faculty Director, Joe McDonald, our Assistant Director, as well as some of our colleagues from Tuck Alumni Engagement. We want to thank the Alumni Engagement team for helping put this event on for everyone today. And we're really excited for the session today, where we get to welcome a friend of the center, a friend of Tuck, and a friend of Dartmouth to campus to join, or virtually to campus to join you all for a great discussion on the role of authenticity in marketing. Larry Weber is a titan when it comes to the history and of technology and particularly marketing communications and public relations. As a founder of the Weber Group and Weber Shandwick and Racepoint Global, as well as CEO of those companies, he has worked with a number of massive companies over the years to kind of grow the importance of marketing communication and public relations for the tech industry, including all the way back to the start of the World Wide Web with Tim Berners-Lee. It's a pretty impressive resume of all the companies that Larry has worked for. He is also a prolific author, and today he's going to talk about his latest book and some of the subject matter therein on authentic marketing, how to capture hearts and minds through the power of purpose. All right, so just a quick couple housekeeping kind of notes. We are going to have a Q&A session after an initial conversation with Larry. If you'd like to ask a question, you can put that in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom meeting. And you can go ahead and type that in anytime. You don't have to wait. And those questions can be either related to this topic or kind of anything kind of more broad-based as well. Larry's gracious and well-versed to have a number of possible kind of areas of expertise that he's willing to share with everyone. So, again, we're really excited to have Larry here. He's come back to campus a number of times and is a Dartmouth parent as well. So, Larry, just want to thank you for joining us today and spending some time to talk about this important subject that's grown even probably more important since you actually authored the book. So, thank you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. So, before I go into a short presentation, I thought I'd give some context of why I wrote Authentic Marketing, and also sort of the impact that this crisis is having on communications and marketing in general, and technology. Like the presentation today, we've seen a huge acceleration in the use of technology, and you're going to see that even more as we come out of this crisis. And the technology era that we're in, I like to say we're in the seventh wave of computing. The first one starting in World War II, all the way up to this past year, where the seventh wave is where technology and humanity meet. And that's why you're starting to see so much more simple technology, easy to use, fast, quick, inexpensive. And that's going to continue, and that's going to impact the way we engage with our constituencies. The reason I wrote Authentic Marketing had two roots in it. One is a Dartmouth root, which is that my oldest daughter was asked to put together, when all the big companies came to visit the campus to recruit the graduates to come work at their company. She and a colleague were asked to put together sort of a SurveyMonkey type of questionnaire on how they thought the experience with that company, whether it be IBM or Facebook or Goldman Sachs, how that went. And I said, could I take a look at that? And she said, sure. And I thought the first question was going to be something like, is this the kind of company that I can build a career with? Can I make money? Can I do well? And the first question they asked was that a good company? And that really stuck in my brain for quite a while. And about 3 or 4 months later, I was having a drink with a client and a friend, Sam Allen, who was the CEO of John Deere at the time, a $75 billion company based out of Moline, Illinois. And we were talking, and he had about another 3 years left to go before he had to retire. And I looked up to him and I said, what's your legacy going to be, Sam? And what would you like it to be? And he looked at me and he said, you know, nobody's asked me that question. And, but I can tell you this, I just don't want to be the guy that sold more green tractors than the last guy. I'd like to have something that's connected to deer that really shows that we cared about people, about society, etc. And we talked a bit, and he asked me to come out to Moline, which is no easy attempt, by the way. This is previous to Zoom. And I made it out there, and we came up with a plan where we would start working with the content of deer with the idea and the moral purpose that they are going to try to get better yields for farmers so that by the year 2050, when there's 2 billion more people on the planet, those people will have enough food to eat. And that became sort of their moral purpose and their reason to be. And that started me thinking even more deeply about this idea of authenticity and moral purpose and how to really accelerate the idea of engagement with your different constituencies. So with that as a contextualness, let's go to the slides, and I will walk you through a bit of the authentic marketing, strategically connecting with today's customer amid a crisis and beyond, actually. Next slide, please. You already were introduced to me, written 6 books, 3 nobody read, 3 everybody read. So I'm batting 500, so I think it's pretty good. I think you'll like this one. Go on, next one. So, and next one. This is really when I started writing the book. This came out, and this is a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, when Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, suggested that, you know what, we've got to pay attention to our investing and make sure that we only invest in companies that have a sense of purpose. And I want to make one thing perfectly clear here. There's been something around for 20, 30 years called CSR, corporate social responsibility. That is not what I'm talking about, and that's not what Larry's talking about. We're talking about going deep into the DNA of a company and finding what is the purpose going forward that you can help make society a better place while still making money, and not necessarily getting rid of your corporate social responsibility, but I view that more as philanthropy than I do in this authentic approach of finding a purpose. So that's the basic difference that I want to make sure that is clear. And BlackRock has continued to keep this purpose objective strong in their investments. And I think they just said, I think it was Friday or Thursday, as they're injecting more and more investment into the economy, that they were going to also be looking at ways to be purposeful in all their investments. Next. 3 key steps in authentic marketing. How do you find your purpose? You know, here's an example. If I were to talk to Amazon, I would say, gee, you're really building leadership in 7 or 8 categories. One of them I remember is drone technology. Wouldn't it be cool to find their purpose in that if there's an issue like the California fires, where all of a sudden the Amazon drones can be used to bring in supplies, things like that. So again, finding a purpose that exists within the company's expertise and what it's doing. Second, you have to activate a new strategic framework, all right? And I'm going to explain that in a few moments. And that's how you use the use of innovation technology, communication strategies, et cetera. And then third, you need to craft an authentic narrative. As you're seeing increasingly on social media and on a variety of different digital formats, you're seeing content that is highly visual, mostly video, and it's usually shorter. A company called Quibi, if you have followed that, is very interested in the idea of 4 to 5 minute, plots of entertainment. You're going to see increasing more of that, and you're going to have to craft that as a company, your owned media, from an authentic point of view. Next. 77% of all millennials feel a stronger emotional connection to purpose-driven brands. I think you're going to see that on the rise coming out of this crisis. There's got to be a trust with the brand, and that's why you're seeing a really huge amount of new media on, especially on Facebook and Google, and Amazon, where you're seeing brand new companies that are focused on having a strong connection with the millennial to try to connect and move their merchandise in a strong way. Next. Finding your purpose. Explore your values. Look at the values in your company's legacy to see if one can be driving force in your purpose. So again, really looking to see what that is. Pay products and services forward. Explore your offerings to find the best way to marry them to a societal need. How does it fit? How does it work? In that Deere example, it was good because they are becoming more of a software company. Of course, they're going to keep selling tractors, but how do you create the better yield for those farmers and have the products be the proof of what you're doing in pushing that and your services forward? And you have to feed your audience's passions. Think about what your customers care about and align with your purpose. You have to constantly be analyzing the data and the analytics around your customers' passions and see what they really are looking for. And they usually will let you know. Customers aren't shy these days. So next slide. 80% of CEOs agree that a company's future growth and success will hinge on a values-driven mission that balances profit and purpose. Again, I'm saying you can make money and you can do very well for your stakeholders, but you can do it with a purpose and an authenticity in all three types of media. And remember, that's earned, which is more like PR, owned, which is what the companies create, and then paid media, which will be a supporting role, unlike it has been the last 70 to 80 years, where it's been the lead marketing tool. I think it will be receding as a support player to authenticity. Next slide. This is an important strategic slide that I use with a lot of clients. And the first three things you have to do is, I always ask, what business are you really in? And again, I'll use the Deere example because it's so strong. Almost every one of the senior managers said, well, we're in the business of selling machines. And I said, no, you're not. I think your real business is helping farmers achieve the best results they possibly can. Underneath that is a line of products and software and so forth that is supporting that business objective. But I believe you have to keep asking, what real business are you in? Second, what technology strategy do you have? I think it's really important to understand the technology that you are developing or that you're buying and how you're leveraging innovation and technology in everything that you do, especially communications. And that's the third strategy, which is engagement. I'm less and less using the words marketing and communications and more using, customer and potential customer engagement. How do you keep your customer engaged? What kind of content needs to be created? What kind of content needs to be presented and distributed to keep a customer engaged? And in the middle of all three of these strategies is your purpose and how you use that purpose within all these three strategies to effectively impact the customer and potential customer that you're working with. Next slide. Then step 3, craft an authentic narrative. Humanize your brand. The best brands today and coming out of this crisis are more human, approachable, transparent, and authentic. Practice story doing, not storytelling. We've been telling stories for years and years. I'm more and more convinced that we just have to show how we're doing good, how we're working for societal outcomes while still making money and telling stories in an active and authentic way. Leverage data telling. Make sure that you understand the data that you're collecting, even though I truly believe we're talking way too much about data and analytics these days. Would love to take some questions on that. I remember when I was young and my dad would take me with him when it was time to buy a new car, and he wouldn't sit and drive in the car first. They would look under the hood. And I think nobody does that anymore. They want to ride around and see how it feels. And I think it's the same thing with data and analytics. We trust data, we trust the analytics, but let's put it under the hood and use it to shape the brand and the stories and the content that we're creating. Again, I think coming out of this crisis, we're going to focus more and more on earned media. You're seeing a huge interest in what I call paid influencers, which is a whole topic of discussion that we could have all day about. But it's really the audiences, your customers are depending on influencers to let them know, which products to buy, which companies to trust. And that's really an element of earned media or positioning and engagement that I think is only going to grow. And I think will be the lead marketing tool that we see. Infuse your CEO's voice. This is nothing new, but you really need to have a personality, an earnestness that is out there continuing to communicate on the brand's behalf. And I think you will find the results are easily measurable and competitive in nature. Next slide. Read and learn how to create a strategy for your business is chapter 12. If you only read 2 chapters, my publisher Wiley has told me that more and more people are buying books to read a specific chapter and not the entire book. Chapter 3 goes deep into the strategy of building an authentic brand that I had mentioned earlier. And chapter 12 is a step-by-step plan where you can easily do it yourself and work toward building a authentic communication and authentic brand. Next slide. We're going to go to some questions now, but I wanted to just highlight that I'm very excited about, even though this has been a terrible experience, this virus, I'm excited about how quickly and rapidly the use of technology and innovative platforms is going to change the way we engage our customers and our different audiences on a day-to-day basis. So if you have time, take a look at the book. All proceeds of the book go to charity. So I'm excited about where marketing's headed and communication's headed. And it's actually going to cut across all aspects of the company. Is before I turn it over to Patrick to curate the questions, I have to say, if you're a senior executive, or when you're a senior executive, you can't just look at marketing as a narrow discipline. What's going to happen is communications and authenticity has to come from recruitment and HR. It has to come from, product development. It has to come from communications. It has to come from technology and innovation. So it's really got to cut across from a horizontal perspective, in my point of view.
Thanks for that, Larry. And also, I think Alva Taylor, our faculty director, has joined as well. I actually had a question around this. Are we in a golden moment for companies to kind of reassess this, given in light of the COVID crisis and sort of taking a step back while there's a pause, which we, understand for most companies, it's a very difficult time and they're just trying to kind of catch up and stay afloat for some of them. And others are trying to keep up with increasing demand like Amazon and others, but is this the right time for a lot of companies to step into that question of what is our moral purpose and really define themselves in light of the current crisis?
I think it's a huge opportunity, at a moment in time where we need companies to step up. As governments became more nationalistic, including our own, there was less ability to depend on governments for direction and for opinions and for social guidance. And companies have a chance to even be more woven in this society and try to bring it together and stand for certain issues. Again, it's hard a little bit because every company is made up of very right people or very left people, So, managing the ability to present a company's brand in a good light that most people would agree with and be responsive to is a challenge. But I think this is a great opportunity. It's also a great opportunity to use new technologies like we're doing now, even though Zoom's been around a bit. It's a way to be more communicative, a way to be, again, more transparent. More communication, not less communication, is going to make a stronger brand. And also it's going to help you build equity in times when you might need that equity, when there's another crisis, which I'm sure is looming somewhere around the corner. So I do think it's a good time for that. So,
Professor T.
How you doing, Larry? Good to see you.
Hi, Alva. How are you? Good.
I'm
Nice to see
doing
you.
well. Good. Quick question. How does your view of purpose connect to the age-old mission statement that lots of companies have had, since the beginning? What's the connection between the two?
Yeah, the connection between the two is trying to at least have within that sort of revised mission statement the idea of how you make money, but it's how you do it in a more personal sense. So what I argue, or not argue, what I say, like in that deer example, is how do you help farmers do a better job? All right, so how do you help, if you're General Motors, how do you help create a cleaner planet? How do you help fight, congestion? How do you serve some type of purpose that also is about selling your products and your services? So I try to combine those two things in search of that moral purpose to create within a brand. So.
One of the other things about that was different, that was surprising to me a little bit, was the capturing the passion of your potential customers or your customers. So and keeping on the pulse of that. And how do you keep, as a company, how do you keep your purpose from, 1 year is going to be over here, another year is going to be over there? How do you keep it from yo-yoing based on the whims of, and I shouldn't say whims, but the changing passions of potential customers?
Yeah, I think you have to continually be reading the data of your customers and where they're headed, and you have to stay ahead of the innovation curve. You have to see, where that evolution is going, much like the technology has done over the last 40 years. Things have gotten smaller, thinner, easier to use. You've got to stay ahead, of those attributes, and actually show that in a compelling way with your content. I think more and more, we're going to see content that's created mostly out of the marketing departments or the different categories within a business that are showing the passion that the company itself has for the customer's issues and the problems that they're having. So I'm more in the business to business world and technology world. So we're looking at those kinds of solutions to create passion. All right. So, from a consumer point of view, consumer packaged goods or, clothing or food, these kinds of things, I think that's less of a passionate approach and more of a just, hey, look, we are respectful to the planet. We have specific kinds of sustainability issues that we follow, or rules that we follow. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can, show that you're a purposeful company, and without having a huge, purpose that's, just consuming you. It's actually should stay out in front, kind of thing.
So we have a number of questions on the analytics side in particular, Larry. So, thinking about the role that analytics has played in marketing and whether it has been, as you mentioned, overemphasized, how does that, what's your view of that, and how do you get an organization maybe that isn't as sophisticated at the top around analytics to understand kind of the role that they can and should play from a marketing, communications, and authenticity perspective in the organization?
Let me answer that from a more complicated point of view first, and then I'll get simpler. I think within the next 3 to 4 years, most analytics will be automated. So you aren't going to have to learn a lot as an executive about the process of using the analytics that you're getting. Perfect example. It's a little funny. I came in to use, I can't say her name right now because she'll probably start playing music. But I came in the other day into this library, and I said to that speaker, "Would you play this music for me?" And nothing happened. And I turned around, thought it was not plugged in, and my wife had put an oven mitt over it, and so that it couldn't listen to me. And I was taken aback a little. I undid it, and I'm sure everybody's had this experience, even if you don't understand sophisticated analytics. But you'll be talking about something, and all of a sudden, gee, on your Facebook feed, there's an ad for the exact thing that you're looking at, or you were talking about. Or another example, in fact, I was in Hanover, New Hampshire when this happened. You're going to think my bride of 40 years is paranoid about, so a lot of people are, but I was telling her I just was excited. I'd come back from Silicon Valley, and I'd met with the chief strategy officer at Samsung. And he was telling me how they were looking at facial recognition in their television screens so that they could tell who's enjoying it, who's not enjoying it, what they're watching, how many people, all this kind of thing. And I said, this is great, this is great information. And I stepped away for a minute, and I came back, and I didn't know that there were Samsung screens at the Hanover Inn, but my wife had put the blanket over the television so that it couldn't tell what was going on. But again, it's this analytic and data collection that is going to be more and more turned through software and AI into actionable messaging. And that's why I say it's going to go under the hood sooner or later. Now, that said, and I'm sure Tuck, you have at least beginning courses in AI and the use of software and the use of analytical tools in helping you to make decisions on the kinds of messaging and the kinds of delivery that you're going to have. And so that's going to be around for us for a long time. But I, again, think it's going to increasingly be automated and give us the answers, just like media buying's become programmatic. And the messages or the ads, which are declining, but are still highly sophisticated as far as reaching the audiences that they want to be reached to.
So Larry, that brings up the question. I think we had a question from the audience as well around sort of which tools and how do you make decisions on tools? Because, as we know, there's a flood of marketing tools into the space. I think in the fall we were having a conversation with the head of marketing at a B2B company, and they said they had actually more marketing platforms and tools to manage than people in the organization. Yeah. It was a large organization. So, how do you think about making that decision around vendor selection and who to trust in this space?
That's a great question. And first, and it's difficult because everybody wants to be your platform, right? I mean, that's the name of the game right now is, the platform that wins. And what's changed in the last 20 years, especially, is I would wake up and I'd only had to compete against another agency, all right? And guess what? I wake up today and there'll be a software company giving advice. There'll be a consulting company giving advice. There'll be an agency giving advice. There'll be hardware companies giving advice. So you start to see these multiple tribes sort of presenting different ideas. And that's why we wake up and we have so many different types of tools. And And it's a difficult choice to make. And that's why I think agencies who are never going to be perfect at picking the tools for you should understand the tools, but get back to the business of content creation. And I think you ultimately, the people that are going to win here are probably software companies. I'm looking at, an Adobe and their tools and platforms. I'm looking at Facebook's platforms, Google platforms, Salesforce.com, Pegasystems. I'm looking at those kinds of companies and understanding how to use them better. I mean, we had a request from Kaiser Permanente about a year ago to help them actually integrate their data with Adobe. And they're asking an agency that. We don't know how to do that. So I think the executive has to ask the question, is it a credible company? Is this a credible platform? Test it, see how it works, especially for your type of business. I do believe in verticalization still, even though some people don't. So who's winning, in the health area, who's winning in the manufacturing area, and which tools. But I'm a big believer in software. And as my friend George Colony, who started Forrester Research, continually says, every company is a software company. So even if you make potato chips. So I have to say that we need to be more students of marketing solutions, more students of analytic solutions and software platforms that fulfill the marketing tasks that we have. And I think that's just reality, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. In fact, part of our business, Patrick, is not just servicing giant companies, but we also do some startups, well-funded startups. And it's interesting that and they're mostly younger people, and they're using all free analytic tools and marketing tools. So they're using all the Google, platforms and some things that you don't have to pay anything for, and playing with it. So I would argue every executive today needs to be part software, at least critic, or software analysis to better communicate and market to their audiences. And you can't just, because my generation, we got into marketing because we were all history majors or English majors and couldn't find a job. Now you get into marketing, you understand software tools, you understand databases, advanced database technology, and you understand collective automation of messaging, I think is very strong. So.
Great. So one of the things that you mentioned, start working with startups. So there was a question around founders and their outsized impact, and is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What happens when you say have a founder who isn't? And I think we talked earlier this spring about this topic. The center had visited with the team at Ben and Jerry's around their founders, even still as a non-active leader, having a huge impact over the moral purpose and the authenticity in that organization. And in general, we find, that founders do have a big impact. But, can you talk a little bit about that impact and whether or not that's a good thing, given that can go both ways? And if you're a CMO, you're a marketing leader, how do you manage the fact that the founder probably does have a much larger voice around that story to be told or to be done?
Another good question. It's also a difficult question because, Ben and Jerry's, they were so passionate, and about social issues. I mean, that you weren't going to calm them down at all, So, and that attracted a specific type of employee, and that's the way it was. And they had a good outcome in what they did, and that was great. But I think, in general, my experience has been in the technology category with leaders when they get passionate about something, it's something very personal. And so they want to give money to Children's Hospital, or they want to create a Children's Hospital, or something around breast cancer, or something very specific. I know one foundation, one of our billionaires I worked for, was all about getting rid of the flu in California, not COVID as just a regular flu, but this became a passion because of the numbers they would see coming through. And so I think you have to let any leader follow their passion. So if they followed their passion to be successful, you're going to have to let them follow it. But how do you bottle that and use it as a content creator to engage your different audiences along the way? And I think that's what's important. I mean, even a guy like, Larry Fink from BlackRock, who would have thought, one of the largest investment companies would say we're only going to invest in purpose-driven companies. That's an amazing statement. So you can argue then that they're actually these passionate founders or these entrepreneurs that are successful are also responsible for leading some societal changes and where we go. So, and again, everybody's going to have an opinion about it, but I think that it's important that we have leaders. I mean, look at Satya at Microsoft, who's done an amazing job, making Microsoft relevant again. He was caught by surprise when his employees were upset that Microsoft software is being used to keep immigration records and keep, people from getting into the country. And no matter what you believe in that, there needed to be more communication and more understanding of those kinds of situations so that you can be an effective leader and you can communicate more fully. So I think that's a mixed bunch of answers, but I think any marketer would be very happy to work with passion. And so I think that's the way to capture it. And I think, we have a history, especially in this country, of having amazing leaders that goes all the way back to Walt Disney and, Thomas Edison, with General Electric. So we are pretty much a personality-driven economy in a lot of ways. Look at today, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, bless his soul, really changed the way, a product was launched, and people still copy that and follow that. So, we have to embrace that and work with it. So,
Larry, let me jump in a little bit and change. What advice would you give for small businesses or entrepreneurship about being authentic as they're trying to recover from COVID?
Yeah, good question, Alva. I think it's important that all communications, even in a small company, come across that you are an authentic business. Even if you're selling jeans or shirts or whatever, you're concerned about making sure that the products are good, that they're made in a sustainable way, and that you actually enjoy your work. You want to protect your employees as much as you can as you come out of this. You've done everything the government has offered to try to do that. Apply for the PPP, and even though it's probably run out by now, and also, be sensitive to costs going forward, especially smaller companies. One thing I've learned from this is, and I'm not a big company, just 150 people or so now, but what I've learned is I don't want to be in commercial real estate anymore because I've learned that, I really don't need all that space, and that I could throw a lot more money to the bottom line and to my employees and making my customer experience richer and better and more effective. If we kept working from home or just came in sometimes, and, because we are social beings. So I think it's going to teach a lot of fiscal lessons, especially to smaller companies and entrepreneurs. And I think it's going to take away any kind of barriers to our customers and just be honest about how we're getting along, what we're doing, how we're trying really hard to stay innovative, using digital technologies to stay in touch and communicate. We have a small client called Skillsoft that is just being very aggressive with things like Zoom and WebEx and et cetera, portal on helping learn new skills in your company. So I would encourage that kind of thing, how you can learn more skills at this time. And, this is an unprecedented event that has happened, and but it happened. So we have to work with it and go. But we're going to lose a lot of companies that were caught in the sort of headlights. But I think there's a lot of opportunity too, competitive opportunity, especially for entrepreneurs to look for even new opportunities to create new products or new markets for their work. And I think spending some time analyzing new opportunities for the skill set that you already have is probably worth doing, so.
So a couple other questions around sort of the authenticity side. So one, as we see the market move in that direction, right? Focus on authenticity. You mentioned the backlash against influencers sort of coming to the surface. Having authenticity as a strategy for kind of customer engagement. Like one question that we received is, do we risk sort of a backlash or authenticity fatigue from this focus on authenticity? I think a lot of folks kind of feel sometimes that can be the case. And then the other is, where does this go wrong? And how do you manage kind of, when you do this poorly, there seems to be, a more significant backlash than to that messaging.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, authenticity, I lay it out in the book, is something that is being truthful, it's being direct, it's based in fact, not fiction. It's something that is defendable, it's not debatable. And I think if you do it wrong, then it becomes debatable, not defendable. And I think that it's really important that the leadership of the company and from the bottom up know that they're working in an authentic place that is transparent, is honest and direct. And it's going to be interesting to see, actually, coming out of this crisis that we're in, if companies are going to force people to work, that's a huge issue, I would think, and because a lot of people don't want to go back into a building, be in an elevator. There's so many issues and things. So I think it's a big opportunity to actually raise the authentic flag and be, definitely be more empathetic to your employees, and therefore more empathetic to your customers and potential customers. So again, it's easier said than done, but I think having an authentic strategy is easy if you're honest and moral about it. And I think you're also going to see an upswing, if it's not happening in Tuck, I bet it will, where an upswing back into ethics courses in business and sort of moral related discussions as we come out of this crisis about how a company should conduct itself with its multiple constituencies. So I think it's going to be interesting.
Are there companies that, as not only a professional in the space, but as someone who pays attention to a lot of this, is there are there good examples and bad examples currently that you've been paying attention to on whether it's watching television or online? Sort of, I think Burger King has raised some kind of, a lot of people have had positive reactions to their campaign as one that sprang to mind for me. But on either side of that coin, the best and the worst, so to speak, that you've seen.
Well, Burger King, I think, actually has done okay with that. I think it's actually been sort of effective. The issue there is, how are you going to stick with it? And how do you keep that thread going, instead of just like a lot of consumer-based companies do, which is they find something that works, they stick with it till they feel it's not working, and they try something completely different. I like companies like IBM, believe it or not, who years ago created a board level committee. Just like there was an audit committee and a governance committee, they had a shared values committee. that had board members on it and senior executives. And that was there to really to monitor sort of moral and ethical issues around values that that company has. Like Alva brought up the mission statements, they sort of shifted into this value kind of discussion. And I think they've tried to keep that when they were trying to build the Watson brand. And I thought that was an interesting play, you know, how Watson helps in health innovation, how Watson helps in financial innovation, and things like that. I thought, you know, Apple does not, which is interesting to me. They're not negative to me, but they're not positive either. I don't see that. I think they're a company that has become a fashion company and a little less of a technology company. So it's interesting that they haven't used their bully pulpit, so to speak, to be a far stronger voice in moral commerce or moral business kinds of things. I think SAP, believe it or not, has done some interesting things on how their software is used to, you know, do a better job in managing hospitals or managing, you know, integrated financial, complex integrated financial things. So I think that's pretty good. The vehicle companies, I don't know. Tesla, I don't know. That seems to go up and down with, to your question about leadership. I mean, he's a strong leader, but it also is one that changes, you know, often. So I think consistency is key in this day and age for brands. And, you know, I liked, you had brought up before this session, the Zoom CEO or founder who was, nobody knew at all and wasn't worth that much money. And then all of a sudden he's worth $5 or $6 billion. You know what? And he has been very authentic, you know, about the downside of the Zoom, you know, firewalls not working all the time and the hacking that can come. We're working really hard at it, you know, and I find that refreshing. And I think that's going to come back and in big brand equity for them as they compete more and more against all the other platforms that are trying to get us all to use in these video sessions and conferences at times. So that's a few of the companies. I wish Amazon would step up some more. I think they have a lot of leadership potential in so many categories, from transportation to delivery to the cloud, you know, and the web services. So, you know, they're still young. You know, the digital native companies are 25 years old at most. So we forget that, you know, so, but it's, they need to lead as well, as do, I think John Deere continues to do a great job in making sure farmers have the best technology available. So.
It's interesting you mentioned, you know, Zoom. Their most recent acquisition just last week was end-to-end encryption company that they purchased, partly for the technology and more for the talent. So one of the questions that came in, you know, there seemed to be a divide even in the way that you answered that between B2C and B2B companies. You know, what is that divide, and is this harder or easier for a B2B company versus a B2C company?
I think it is easier for a B2B company, actually. You know, and I'll admit it, that I think it's harder for a B2C company. I think because we have been so trained, like I was alluding to, consumer-based companies to whatever sticks, whatever is working, whatever promotion, whatever, you know, idea, you know, what, you know, and still focused on what, you know, David Ogilvy called the, you know, the big idea, you know, and, you know, and there's histories of big ideas, right? You know, from where's the beef, speaking of, you know, Burger King, you know, so I think it is more difficult, but I do think that what B2C companies have to understand is that their messages aren't going to be that controllable anymore. So you just can't do a creative for 30 seconds and think you're controlling the message. Most people devour content not around television programming. So as we start to move into what I call a subscription economy, where increasingly we're going to subscribe to the content we're getting, then it's going to be a lot harder to do that big idea, creative messaging that we're so used to in the television era, which you can't do in Netflix and other content creation, Quibi, and these kinds of things. So I think we're going to move into subscription models. I think we're going to move into what I call the PBS model, which is underwriting things. So, what kind of content should a certain B2C company be underwriting, that shows their values, that shows their care for their customers and their potential customers. So I think that's, it is harder, but I think that's a good challenge, to creating a brand in an era that was accelerated by a crisis into multi-delivery points. I mean, I was on a panel last week with Nicholas Negroponte, who founded the Media Lab, and a few other well-known thinkers, and we were talking about when was the smartphone going to disappear. Now, and there was a lot of different opinions about that. There was, not for decades, then there was maybe 5 years, and as humanity and technology converges, is everything a device? Is everything automated? So I think especially the consumer companies are going to have to really study technology and innovation from a delivery and infrastructure point of view. Because I also think connectivity is going to almost cost nothing most places. So, Zoom doesn't cost very much. And I think that's going to change the way we have to create our content and communicate. So an eye on communications infrastructure, I think, is going to be important, especially for consumer companies.
So all this connectivity also creates a lot of data that creates a lot of other challenges, with some questions regarding privacy and sort of the role that privacy plays in your strategy to be authentic. You mentioned earlier, even just covering devices and things like that. How should these companies be thinking about the role that privacy plays? And where is that line between gathering the type of information that you need to understand your customers well enough to match message, but not going so far into the world where it kind of becomes overkill or creepy or too far or too invasive, especially given that that's often a moving target for customers?
Talk about a moral or Aristotle question, I mean,
we don't do light here, right? It's the value of the liberal arts education.
It's I talk about it a little in the book about the morality around data collection and data use. I think with hats off to a colleague, Scott McNeely, who is one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, that succeeded in the workstation world. He famously said, privacy, there's no such thing as privacy, get over it, And I think to the point of view, we've all mostly, I shouldn't be that blanket, but I think most of us think, look, it's okay if they know I like blue shirts, or they know I like this kinds of shoes, or they know I like this kind of wine. And, like you get on Facebook that, 53 of your friends like this Beaujolais from this, vineyard in France, and then the ad comes up and that. I think we're all fine with that. I think where the moral dilemmas are going to come is things that are really personal in data, and that's going to be healthcare data. And I think that's going to be a real tough one to police, because I don't think governments are very good. Europe's a little ahead of us, obviously, in policing, some of the privacy issues and, the use of data issues. They seem to stay on top of it more. The American government talks a big game, but then, Facebook, they called, when they had Zuckerberg come into the Senate, they were calling it the Facebook, which is what its name was in 2004 when it was founded. So, and they asked how it made money. Well, he's the fourth richest person on the planet. It's not by just doing advertising. You know, it's about knowing everything. And the moral dilemma is going to be for Facebook is where do they use that health data that they're collecting, and where do they draw the line? And I think that's going to have to come from inside, not outside. And I'm sorry to say. So it's going to have to be self-policed, just like your own person is sort of self-policed. And, you know, I talk about companies having souls. I believe that. Some of my friends think I'm nuts, but I do think companies have a soul, and they should respect that soul. And they should make sure that there's lines on the use of data for the benefit of their customers, not for the benefit of themselves completely.
It's been interesting to watch in this moment around health data that the contact tracing apps created by Google and Apple were more respective of privacy than many of the European countries were developing themselves. I think Germany essentially opted to go the route of the large tech companies. Their original app was much more invasive. The UK said, nope, we want much more personal data on our citizens, and rejected the Google and Apple, I guess it was Google and Apple's applications for that. So it's a fascinating, you mentioned Europe, but we're in a weird moment in time, right? Where now they're looking at it and saying, well, we want more data. This is so important. We can't, like, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out globally.
Also, Patrick, think about all these CEOs now trying to make decisions on, should we look at more data? Are our employees at home really working 8 hours? Are they really, and as they move back to the office, if we all go back to the office, and really, are they staying 6 feet apart? Do we care they're staying 6 feet apart? I mean, these are all, again, these border on existential questions, and business is not used to, existential questions except around things like bankruptcy, or something like that, or diversity, but I think it's I could see a whole business school courses in these kinds of questions, the proper use of data, the proper use of analytics, and again, health-wise, I mean, just think if you're going to get a new job and they know I had a certain type of cancer. Well, gee, that's a little borderline there,
Yeah. It's so there often are perceived, and you mentioned this in your presentation around sort of millennials having different views, and Gen Z and millennials having different views than Gen X and baby boomers. Can you talk a little, like, do you think that's going to continue going forward, and are there significant differences, or is it the comfort with familiarity with technology and how it works? So whether this is from a privacy perspective, authenticity, or in that current kind of resistance to oversight of my activities and behaviors, it's sort of a, do you think that that's something that you will see differences in as well?
Yeah, I do. And I think, remember, my generation, started, I helped introduce the IBM PC. So I go back that far, but there was a big line between our generation and technology. What's happened is the millennials were already in technology, and now they don't view it. I remember my three, overly educated children that all went to Dartmouth, saying, I had this saying, and I still do it. I said, I'd leave the dinner table and go, I have to go online, do some work. I'm going to go online. And they started to laugh at me and said, why do you say online, Dad? And I said, well, what do you say? And they said, we don't, we just are. So the idea of a generational difference that has absorbed technology into their humanity demands a different approach to communications and content creation. And I think that's what you're going to see more and more. And anyway, I'm lucky that I've been around innovators so that I would dive in even if it was something that didn't last that long, So.
I think, Alva, you look like you had a question coming in.
No, I just want to, how do you, some companies have gotten criticized for capitalizing on COVID in their advertising. How do you, what do you think about that? How do you avoid seeming to be sort of capitalizing on it in this era of trying to be authentic in your response, but not trying to see like you're trying to manipulate people around this topic?
I would think it's, yeah, I would not be manipulative about it. I wouldn't get on that bandwagon, but I would want to get a little credit if I, started making masks and I took the economic hit for that, or ventilators or whatever it was. I think that's okay to remind people that you did that you saw an opportunity to help, to step up to that. I think that's okay. But just taking out an ad and, and trying to claim something that, takes advantage of the situation, I think is wrong. I think that's a moral line, again, that shouldn't be crossed. And that's just my opinion, so.
Right, but it's things you see like, thank all the first responders, buy more Pop-Tarts, right? It's, it's that what you see sometimes, yeah.
I don't get that one. I really don't get that one. But that said, maybe that's my business to business hat, or my technology hat coming through, Alva, that I'm thinking more seriously about it. And maybe the vast public that buys a lot of Pop-Tarts gets a warm and fuzzy feeling that Kellogg's is thanking the first responders. So I'm okay with that. I mean, it's like when I said about corporate social responsibility, I'm not against that. I think that's a good thing to be philanthropic. I'm just saying there's something deeper in a company that can produce a more authentic brand. That's my point of view.
So following on that, this is probably one of our last questions just due to time constraints, but there's a question around creating content in this moment where we're remote and we don't have access. Historically, a lot of content that was being produced was highly polished and highly kind of produced. Can you talk a little bit about what are the ways or strategies for companies that can be effective given the dispersed nature of many of their companies and resources and assets that they would typically rely on to create content?
Well, even before this crisis, Patrick, if you would have told me that we'd be making 7, 8, 9 short videos a week for our clients and that they would not cost that much, that a number of them being filmed on iPhones, that I would have said, no way, And so what's happened, and I think this will even go faster as this crisis abates a bit, is that everybody will be a content creator, and it's going to be up to the marketing professionals to say what is good, what's effective, what's engaging, what's representative of the brand. I think is going to be all critical, but I think, I think most people have become content creators. So I think it's got to be careful. And I also think we're going to be more critical of our content, what's working and not working. So I'm amazed at how patient companies are that no one clicks on certain content, say on their web presence or whatever, but they leave it there. Everybody's clicking on this one, and you go, well, what's about that content that everybody likes? So figure that out and do more of that, and get rid of content that doesn't work. Just chuck it, and get rid of it. So I think this will all make us far more effective, far better tools. And we're going to, I think, really have to be companies that are responsible and moral about the use of data. If one thing came out of today, and the idea of authenticity, it also includes a morality about the use of data that I think is self-policing and important, and is not just marketing's job. So, yeah.
Well, I think we're out of time, unfortunately. I think we do have a session later this month with you, much more focused on China and sort of your work with Chinese companies and sort of perspectives on the back and forth kind of relationship between technology companies in China and the US and Europe and other places coming up. So for alumni, you can find information on MyTuck for that. On behalf of the center and, Alva and all the whole team here and at Tuck, including, Renee and Amanda, with Tuck Alumni Engagement, I just want to thank you for spending, your time today sharing about this incredibly important topic, especially at this time, this point in history. It's incredibly timely content for us. And Alva, I think, has probably, I'm sure, wants to say a little bit of a thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Larry. Gail says hello as well.
Hi, Gail.
And so to you and yours, and as always, I'll be picking your brain at some point about all of this. So we really appreciate it.
And,
All right.
and thank you to all of the alumni and students on the line. We really appreciate your time today, and hopefully you had a good learning session.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
everybody remember, the definition of marketing hasn't changed. That's the influence of opinion through content. And that will always be the truth. So be safe, everybody. And thanks for having me. I hope you got something valuable out of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Larry. Thanks, everyone.